Hello and welcome to today's Innovation Women Speak webinar. This is part of an ongoing series of webinars starring Innovation Women speakers. And if you're not familiar with Innovation Women, we're an online speakers bureau. We connect event managers with awesome speakers who just happen to be women. And by the way, if you're not a speaker or on our platform already, there's going to be a special discount code at the end of today's presentation that will help you if you join our group by midnight tonight. So, today's speaker is Sheri Saginore. She is the President and Chief Speechwriter at Smart Speeches. She is an award-winning speechwriter, and Smart Speeches is a Boston-based communications firm. As a speechwriter and a public speaking coach, she helps corporate executives, nonprofit leaders, and entrepreneurs inform and inspire live audiences. With over 20 years of experience as a writer and speaker in multiple industries, she brings to her work a true passion for the spoken word. She specializes in crafting signature talks for women. When she's not working with clients, she enjoys listening to podcasts, reading nonfiction, and hiking up mountains with her husband and 2 sons. So before I turn things over to Sheri, I'd like to review the features you have at your fingertips during this webinar. What you see here is an annotated version of your screen. Below the video viewing window, there are a number of tabs. The default tab is for asking questions. You can type in a question at any point during the program, and we'll be answering those later on. Another tab is for attachments, where you'll find 2 documents from Sheri that she'd like to share. The Vote tab is where you see the polls, and we'll be launching those in a minute. The tab called Rate This enables you to rate the webinar and provide us with feedback. We actually read all the feedback and adjust things accordingly. The feedback we've received from other webinars has been super helpful, so feel free to tell us everything. And if at any time you need audio help, feel free to click on the Help button at the bottom of the screen. If you're using your phone to dial in, you may want to mute your computer audio to avoid echoes. And now I'll be launching the first poll to see who is in the audience today. The question we'd like to ask is, what type of public remarks do you expect to write most often? The choices are conference speeches, keynotes or shorter, ceremonial remarks, thank yous, tributes, banquet toasts, etc., informal talks, TED-style talks, or other things. Great. Thank you for answering that question. Now, without further ado, I'll hand things over to Sheri.
Thank you, Bobby. Let's jump right in with a quote. After that, we will look at the agenda for today's session. So I want you to imagine you're in the market for a new car. You're in an auditorium listening to a speech given by the VP of Marketing at Jaguar, the luxury car company. The audience members are all potential car buyers like you. Here's part of the speech. As I'm reading, be sure that if you haven't already done so, you take the poll. It'll give us a good idea of what you're looking for in today's webinar. All right, so here we go with the quote. Ladies and gentlemen, our statistical and analytical data on the XKRS High Performance Coupe collected over a time period of approximately 12.3 months clearly indicate 92% synergies with respect to the ability to navigate challenging terrain using HAC, blah, 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 blah. All right. Bobby, can you enable the next poll, which should be something like what did you think of this quote?
Your poll is enabled.
Great. So soon, yeah, I can actually see the results coming in. Clearly, this language isn't effective. It's full of long, complex sentences. It's very dry. There's no emotion. It's full of jargon that a layperson wouldn't know. People don't actually speak like this. So let's imagine the scenario again. Same speaker, same purpose, same audience. Ladies and gentlemen, a Jaguar is about more than just owning a car. It's about performance. It's about style. It's about success. It's about who you are. On any road, in any condition, a Jaguar says one thing: excellence. Now, most people think this works better. Why? Well, it's simple, short, it's conversational, it makes sense, and I guarantee it sells more Jaguars. I was invited here today to share with you some fundamentals of writing public remarks. Chances are all of us at some point have to write and deliver remarks such as a conference speech, keynote address, an informal talk, or a banquet toast. For some, it's intimidating, and for others, it's a piece of cake, but rarely is it systematic. So during this session, first we'll examine the elements that are in a, quote, good speech, why some hold your attention and others put you to sleep. Then we'll look at a speech structure you can use no matter what type of remarks you need to write. Then we'll talk about the actual writing process, the putting pen to paper part, or fingers to computer keyboard, if you will. Then last, I'll touch on a few key delivery tips that most people find useful. At the end of the webinar, you'll have a set of guiding principles and concrete tools to use when writing your own public remarks. Now, before we go on, I want to make sure that everyone understands that this webinar is not about public speaking techniques. Near the end, as I said, I'll touch on a few delivery tips, but just a few. This webinar is also not about creating PowerPoint prezos. Still, this webinar, well, I'll say too, some of what we'll cover can be used when creating PowerPoint prezos, but still, this webinar is about writing some kind of public remarks using either a script or a set of talking points, or even improvisationally. For some of you, the content will be completely new. For others, it will simply validate what you're already doing. Either way, if you stay with me to the end, I think you'll find there's something here for everyone. So here we go. All right. In order for a speech to be effective, the speaker must connect with the audience in some way. Analyzing your audience will give you information that can help you build common ground between you and the audience. The better you know your audience, the more likely you'll be able to craft a speech that connects with them. So what do I mean by who are they? Are they sales prospects, employees, the board of directors at your organization? Are they innovation women speakers? This also includes demographics like age range, gender, culture, etc. Now, what do they want? Make sure you understand clearly what your audience expects you to speak about. It seems obvious, but it can be rather nuanced, so let me give you an example. This is paraphrased from the Elements of Speechwriting by Jeff Scott Cook. Imagine that a presenter is trying to convince a community to build a park. The speaker might be inclined to spend the majority of the speech giving reasons why a park would benefit the community. However, what if she found out ahead of time that most of the neighbors already thought that the park was a good idea, but they were worried about safety issues? The speaker could focus on how park users would be safer in the park than they currently are playing in the streets. She could direct the persuasive power of the speech at the most important obstacle to building the park: safety. So the second element I want to talk about is writing for the ear. Many speeches are written as if they were meant to be read silently by a reader, not spoken aloud by a speaker. I mean, they've got long, complex sentences, perfect grammar. But when we read, for example, a novel or an essay or a news article, we process the information differently than if we hear it. We can go back and reread it, contemplate it, digest it. But a speech lives in real time and is only heard once. So the language must capture and hold the listener's attention. Think back to the first Jaguar quote. With respect for writing for the ear, what didn't work, right? It was long, jargony, lots of statistics, acronyms. People don't actually speak like that. In short, it's hard on the ears. Why was the second one better? It was full of imagery. It mimicked conversation. It used plain language. It's written for the ear. Now, this is an excerpt from a famous Martin Luther King Jr. speech. No need to read it in full, just scan it. This speech is considered one of the best ever written for many reasons. The time and place it was delivered, the impact it's had on generations, the phrasing, the musicality, and what line does everyone remember? I have a dream. Now, why is that? Well, it's short, it's memorable. Dr. King repeats it over and over again. It's the cornerstone of the speech. It's what speechwriters call the main point. The main point is the most important message of any speech. It's the overarching idea that you're trying to get across. In fact, it's sometimes called the big idea. It's the one thing you want your audience to remember most when you're done. And here's the thing. It's very important to know your main point when you're writing a speech. So here's some examples. Here are just a few examples. Take a look at those. Malala Yousafzai is the youngest winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. She's the woman who was shot by the Taliban for trying to educate girls in her hometown in Pakistan. Alicia Garza is one of the two founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. So you can see how effective a good main point can be. If you remember only one thing from this webinar that will make your speeches effective, in fact, better than the vast majority of speeches delivered each day, remember this. Structure your speech around one main point. Once you've got a main point, everything flows from it. Now, when writing, how do you determine what's your main point? It may be clear, but if not, here's some things you can try. Imagine you've just finished your speech. You're standing there, preparing to leave the stage. Right then, what do you want your listeners to be thinking? What do you want them to be feeling? What message will make them think and feel that? That's your main point. Or another way, you can ask yourself, if the New York Times were covering your speech, what would you want the next morning's headline to be? Another couple notes about main points. The shorter your main point is, the better. Why? Shorter is more memorable. I actually often say make it no longer than 140 characters because that's the length of a tweet. Well, it used to be. Still, 140 characters is a good target. Now, I want to acknowledge that when you're crafting a speech, determining your main point isn't always easy. In fact, it can be quite hard, but it's worth figuring it out because if you don't know it, your audience won't either. Now, if you have any questions at this point, be sure to type them in so we can address them at the end. Okay, let's move on to speech structure. There are many speech structures out there. The most common are a storyline. The whole speech is the story of a journey. I was born, blah, 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 and today, blah, blah, blah. Problem solution, an example is, we need more volunteers in our organization. Here's how to recruit them. Comparative is often used by politicians debating different policy issues. My political opponent says we should do X about global warming, but I say we should do Y. Now, all of these structures can work depending on the circumstances. But today, we're going to discuss one simple, effective structure that will work almost all of the time. It's called the essay structure. The reason I highlight this structure in my workshops is because most of us studied essay writing in high school or college, so you're familiar with it. Today's kids learn the elements of essay writing in elementary school, but very few people realize that it's a terrific and underused speech structure. So we've got an opening, subtopics, and a closing. Let's look at each section in detail. Now, I'm going to run through the different sections all at once. Don't worry about absorbing it all. Once I've defined all the sections, we'll look at a specific speech to show you everything in action. The opening is where you get the audience's attention. Engage them. I did it at the beginning of this webinar with a confusing quote. So here's some possible openings. Quote, you might say, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, I have a dream. Tonight, I want to share with you my dream for Children's Hospital. Story, on my way to work last week, something happened. An unexpected statement, or that's like, tonight I'm here to tell you why the internet is finished. And then you can spark your audience's imagination. That's like, imagine it's the year 2099. Now, subtopics. Subtopics make up the middle part of your speech. It's the stuff between the opening and the closing. Each subtopic should offer supporting info for your main point. This is where you focus on the who, what, when, where, and how, and give explanations and examples. Now, there are often 3 subtopics or 3 logical parts. But if you don't have 3 subtopics, that's okay. You may only need 2. But in general, 3 works well. How subtopics work will be clearer in a minute when we look at a real speech. The most important thing to do in your ending is to reiterate or at least allude to your main point. This will give your remarks coherence and closure. So some possible endings. The call to action is pretty popular. You tell your audience something to do as a result of hearing your speech. For example, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Vote today. Give generously. A couple other keys to effective endings. Make sure you end on time. Think of how annoyed you feel when a speaker goes way over the time limit. Also, end with conviction. Not, well, that's all I have to say. Instead, we can do this. All right, let's look at an example. Excuse me. I wrote this speech. It's a fundraising speech. Oh, hold on. Got to advance the slide. All right. This is a fundraising speech. It'll come up in a minute. Given by the executive director of a local nonprofit at their annual fundraising gala. Note that she has a wide variety of stakeholders in the audience. I changed the name of the speaker and the organization just to preserve anonymity, but the speaker did give me permission to use the speech as an example. So I'm going to read this aloud and comment it as we go along. When delivered, it's short, only about 3 minutes. I realize this may be difficult for you to see depending on what device you're using. So if you want to download it to read later, you'll find a copy in the attachments section of the webinar. You can see it up above. Most of you should be able to see it, attachments and links. So again, this is a fundraising speech given at an annual dinner. All right, here we go. Wait, I'm going to have to see if I can enlarge my... Oh, that's a problem. My screen is too small. me to
I think
see
you're
it.
going to have to read it, Sheri. Give a
I
speech.
know. Or recite it. Believe it or not. All right, I'm going to try. It's that the font on my screen is so small. Okay, I can do it. Here we go. Tonight, we're here to celebrate what Clothes for Kids has achieved this year. And I'm so sorry, guys. Hold on, I'm so sorry. Let me just grab a bigger copy of the speech. Okay. My apologies for the technical difficulties. We are ready to go. Tonight we're here to celebrate what Clothes for Kids has achieved this past year and to look to the future. As I gaze out at all of you this evening, I'm filled with gratitude. So look what she's done right up front. We talked about engaging your audience. She's telling them why they're there, and she's reaching out and pulling the audience in by thanking them. Our organization is stronger than ever. We are succeeding in our mission to help low-income families in northeastern Massachusetts, our neighbors, raise healthy children by providing basic necessities. I'm here tonight to thank you for your part in our success and to ask for your continued support. Because of you, Clothes for Kids is thriving, but the need is still great. So there's a lot going on in this one paragraph. There will be people in the audience who have an intimate familiarity with what this organization does, and there'll be spouses or friends who were dragged along and have absolutely no idea what this organization does. So for everyone, she states the mission up front to help low-income families in northeastern Massachusetts. And then notice at the very end of the paragraph, she states the main point clearly. Because of you, Clothes for Kids is thriving, but the need is still great. Now we get to our first subtopic. Our service model works. And then she takes the next 3 paragraphs to explain, to show why and how the service model works. She says they collect new and used items at their Boston Center, and then they distribute it to other nonprofit agencies like Head Start and Community Health Center. She says exactly what they do and how they do it. And she talks about how many people they serve. 8,000 children received clothing from Clothes for Kids in 2014. Also, notice the imagery: cribs, car seats, strollers, and that item we never ever have enough of, diapers. Thousands and thousands of diapers. Every day, social workers tell us how much families appreciate these items they may not otherwise be able to get. You make all this possible. Because of you, Clothes for Kids is succeeding, but the need is still great. Now we move to subtopic 2. The topic sentence is, as a result of our hard work, we're also growing. And then she talks for this paragraph about how they're growing. They've expanded their programs and hours. They're collecting more goods than ever. They got a $100,000 grant. They can store more clothing. So because of you, we are growing. And yet the need is still great. Another restatement of the main point. Now her third subtopic is all about thank yous. She's got to hit everybody who's out there, the board, her volunteers, her staff, and she thanks them. And then in her conclusion, she sums it all up and provides a call to action. Thank you all for coming tonight and for letting me share with you the significant impact you've had on so many lives. In a moment, you'll watch a very brief slideshow followed by the live auction part of the evening. I encourage all of you to give generously. That's her call to action. With your support, Clothes for Kids will continue to, and here we see all the themes, to thrive, will continue to grow, and will continue to help our neighbors in need. one child at a time. So, sometimes students ask me, do you have to say the main point that many times? And the answer is no. That night the speaker said it in the opening and then rephrased it once at the end. This version is a teaching tool, so I put it after each paragraph to hammer home the concept. And again, if your particular screen is too small to see any of this, you can download the speech from the attachment section of the webinar. All right, let us move on to the writing process. This is a simple speech outline template that you're looking at right now. Again, very similar to a basic essay structure. I often encourage people to use it as part of their speech writing process. This is not where you write the full speech. It's a place to begin capturing and organizing your ideas. There's a space for your main point to help keep you focused. If there's a quote or example you want to include, you can jot it down here. Now, you don't have to do this, obviously, but if you're struggling to organize your thoughts, try this and see if it helps. By the way, in the attachments section of your webinar screen, along with the fundraising speech, you'll find a copy of this the template available for download. Here is the Close for Kids speech template filled out. So as you're looking at that, you can see how it's broken down. Let's talk for a minute about talking points. If you prefer to speak from talking points rather than a script, the speech template can be a useful tool. You fill out your template, capturing the key ideas and examples that you want to include. Then you can speak directly from the template or transfer to note cards, whatever works for you. Now is when you really begin writing. After you've filled out your template, you use it as a guide. Now, when I write a speech, I like to write an entire draft, start to finish, even though it's always terrible, that first draft. I don't try to perfect each sentence before moving on to the next one, because if I work forever to perfect the opening before doing anything else, and then I run out of time, the first part of my speech is great, but the rest of it gets shortchanged. So I write a full draft, then I step away from it and go do something else. I take a walk, I eat a meal, I get some sleep, then I come back to it and write a second draft. Then I repeat those steps. I write, I take a break, I rewrite as many times as necessary. You may do it differently, and that's okay. Regardless, as you move through the process and the speech begins to come together, here are a few things to focus on during the rewrites. You want to shorten your sentences, simplify words, take out any jargon, limit statistics, make it conversational. And then during the final edits, you're talking about spelling and typos, fixing a word here or there. Now, people often ask me, how many drafts do you need? Well, it varies. Sometimes I do 3 drafts, and sometimes I do 10. You find what works for you, and then you do that. Now, everyone wants to know about length. How long should your speech be? Well, it varies from speaker to speaker, but a good line is about 120 words per minute. If you want a more accurate answer, you can time yourself reading for 1 minute and plan accordingly. Remember this, though. Shorter is better. Yes, a keynote at a conference could go 20 minutes or more, but a thank you speech at your annual meeting doesn't need to go on for 20 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes is plenty. Think of your own experience as a listener. How often do you listen to a speaker and when it's over think, wow, I wish she'd gone on longer? A short, clear speech has far greater impact than a long, wandering one. Okay, feel free to submit questions about the writing process. But now I want to say a few words about speech delivery. Some speakers don't want to read from a script because they don't want to look down. So here's a strategy that mitigates that problem. Choose a font you find easy to read, enlarge it, and then put text on about half or no more than 2/3 of the page. This helps keep your head up as you read. Here's what it looks like. You can see that this is Helvetica 18, and it's on about 2/3 of the page, double-spaced. Arial works well too. Find one that works for you. All right, practicing. I'm always surprised at the number of people who don't practice reading their speeches out loud. You need to hear what your audience will hear. There are many apps that record audio. Find one that you like. Better yet, videotape yourself practicing and then watch. You'll learn a lot and you'll be able to make adjustments you would have otherwise missed. Now, there's a ton of information out there about the mechanics of public speaking. What to do with your hands, how to articulate clearly, how to move in a way that looks natural. But my tips today are about being mentally prepared and coping with nervousness and mistakes. In most speaking situations, your audience will be there voluntarily. They want you to do well. Remembering that they aren't adversaries may help you feel less vulnerable in front of them. Also, when you're up there, it's human nature to think that the gig is all about you because everyone's eyes are on you. But the truth is that they're thinking mostly about themselves, specifically how your message relates to them. Think of it this way. You're not performing for them, you're sharing with them. Keeping this in mind will help you keep focused. Now, on the subject of mistakes, I have a brief anecdote. At the 2013 Academy Awards, Jennifer Lawrence won the Oscar for Best Actress. The presenter announced her name, and the winner is Jennifer Lawrence. The orchestra started playing, and Jennifer got up from her seat and walked toward the stage. On the way up the steps, she tripped on the hem of her dress and fell forward. Millions of people around the world saw it on TV. You can watch a clip of it on YouTube. Jennifer gathered herself, stood up, continued up the steps, and walked to the microphone. The audience in the auditorium rose to give her a standing ovation. She blushed and she said sheepishly, "You guys are just standing up because you feel bad that I fell, and that's really embarrassing. But thank you." What Jennifer didn't do is apologize. Instead, she proceeded to deliver a wonderful thank you speech. My point is, if you mess up during your speaking engagement, think of Jennifer Lawrence tripping at the Oscars. She's human, just like the rest of us, and if she can recover with dignity, so can you. So in a moment, I'm going to answer the questions you've submitted, but just to recap, over the last however many minutes, 33 minutes, we've covered the importance of audience in speech writing, a tried and true all-purpose speech structure, suggestions for pounding out those drafts, and a few speech delivery tips you may not have thought of. I want to acknowledge that this stuff isn't easy, but I promise if you follow these principles and use the tools I've given you, even if it's just having a main point and sticking to it, your speeches will be better than the vast majority of public remarks that are given each day. Just a note before we do questions. As Bobby mentioned when she introduced me, I specialize in helping women speakers create their very own signature talk. Every woman needs a signature talk. One killer, all-purpose speech that conveys who you are, what you do, and how it benefits your clients and the world. It's an invaluable tool to have on hand because you can use it in multiple settings, conferences, informal talks, YouTube clips, whatever, because you can customize it for each audience and length. If you don't already have a signature talk, definitely create one and use it to propel your speaking career to the next level. In fact, just for the folks on this webinar, I'm offering a complimentary 30-minute consultation to discuss your signature talk. If you already have one, great. Let's talk about how to make it even better, perhaps through some coaching on your delivery. This offer is good through February 15th, so if you're interested, shoot me an email. My contact, oh, forgot to advance the slide. My contact info is right here. Now I will turn it back to Bobby for questions. Bobby.
Great. Thank you so much, Sheri. That was terrific. And I have to admit, I've stumbled a few times and probably not looked quite as graceful as Jennifer Lawrence doing it. So a couple of questions from our audience, and actually I see more coming in at the same time. One person says, this agenda is a great outline to help those getting started. How can we get it, Sheri?
Okay, the outline. Do you mean the essay
agenda?
outline?
I think this is referring specifically to the agenda.
You mean the actual agenda?
Yep.
I can.
Maybe that people want some access to some of your slides as well. Do you have them online somewhere?
I can make them available.
Okay.
I can make.
But also, folks, this will be you'll be able to access this webinar as well, so the replay will be available. You can also take a look at that.
That's right. I think I could make the agenda available as an attachment later, and yes, the entire thing will be available for replay. So, so hopefully you'll be able to get it one way or the other.
Okay, and I think some of our use of jargon may have been confusing to someone. Someone wanted to know what a prezzo is.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That's hysterical. Okay, a prezzo is a presentation.
All right, and for talks that, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking. I'm so glad someone called me out on it. Absolutely. There's a great example. Get the jargon out. All right, thanks. Bobby, what's next?
Yep. For talks that are instructional, first do this, then do that, result, what is the main point?
Well, that's a great question. It's different. I mean, I would not consider this webinar that I gave today a speech, a set of remarks. An instruction, a slide deck that's meant to convey particular information is kind of a different animal. However, I will say this. Even if there are several main points or key pieces of information that you're trying to get, that you're trying to deliver in an instructional webinar or presentation, there still should be one overarching idea for that webinar. So, for example, in this webinar, the overarching idea is you're going to get tips and instruction on how to write speeches, public remarks. And then within that, we talked about the different elements of that. So it is different, but I would say that there's an overarching idea even with instructional presentations.
Okay. Can you discuss how to handle an interactive situation, such as when someone asks a question and gets you off track? How best to answer the question and weave it into your speech going forward?
Yeah, it's tough depending on the nature of the question and the dynamic. I'll say this first. That is a risk for everyone who's presenting. So if you get thrown off by a question or you lose your groove, you're not alone. I would say that I would turn to one of the tips I gave earlier. If you get off track somehow, gather yourself, remember what the point was that you were trying to make before you got interrupted, and dive right back in. If the person, a lot of times what happens is a person asks a question and then a follow-up question and then it becomes a discussion and all of a sudden you're down a rat hole. And it's okay to simply answer the original question briefly and then say, all right, let's get back to blah, 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 blah. It's tough,
Great.
and it takes a little bit of diplomacy, and it takes having to deal with this type of situation a number of times. But if you stay focused and do your best to keep everybody on track, most of the time you'll be fine.
Great. Our next question is, do you have recommendations for crediting other works and quotes within your speech?
Yes, always do it. If you are quoting someone verbatim, you absolutely have to say, this is a direct quote from whoever. And even if it's a paraphrase, you still should credit the appropriate person. I did it myself in this webinar. The example about the community that was trying to build a park, I said, this is paraphrased by Jeff Scott, from a book by Jeff Scott Cook, and named the work too. It's called The Elements of Speechwriting. So the short answer is, you gotta do it.
Do you have any tips for making a speech sound more conversational? This person says, I'm often memorizing and it sounds too scripted.
Well, that depends on if it's the language that you are using or if you're feeling like a robot just doing delivery. So in terms of the writing, I would say if you've got a speech, a script, a set of remarks that are written out, first go over that with a very carefully. Read through it as you're writing it and revising it, and see if you've got some of those long, complex sentences. If you're using words that the people have to look up in a dictionary, then chances are it doesn't belong in your speech. The other thing is, here's a great way to know if it's conversational enough. Read it out loud. When you read the speech out loud, you'll be able to hear how it sounds to other people. You'll also notice things like, am I tripping over a phrase? Am I losing my own train of thought in the middle of this sentence even though I wrote it? And those will cue you to whether or not the writing is too long, wandering, et cetera, et cetera. You do want to keep it conversational. Now, in terms of the delivery, if you're feeling like, if it's feeling stilted because you're delivering it, my recommendation is simply practice. Practice, practice, practice. Because if the speech itself is written in plain language, et cetera, then practice. As you continue to practice it, it will feel more natural to you, and then also to the audience. Bobby, you think that answers the question?
Yeah, I think we do. How do you best balance images, Cite, with your spoken word sound if you're using pictures and imagery on the screen to also tell the story?
Well, the answer is the fewer slides, the better. And a general rule is, well, let me say this first. Speechwriters in general do not like PowerPoint presentations, long PowerPoint presentations with lots of words on them. If you're delivering a keynote address, for example, or some sort of ceremonial remarks, because it's more of a distraction than an enhancement. So to effectively use images, if you're going to, I would say limit the amount of slides that you have, and don't, whatever words you have on the slide, don't make sure there aren't very many words on the slide, and use your pictures sparingly. As you're thinking about, do I use this image, ask yourself, does it complement what I'm going to be saying? Not does it say the same thing, but does it complement and enhance what I'll be saying? Less is always more with the PowerPoint slides.
Gotcha. So at the beginning, we were asking our guests about the different types of speeches, conferences, ceremonial, TED, and people what people were giving most often, and then you really talked about one particular structure. How are these scenarios different, and should the structure be modified depending on the type of speech?
Okay, so most people said they're looking for conference speeches. Majority are doing conference speeches, keynotes, and other shorter conference speeches. So for that, the structure that we went over today is very useful. It's incredibly useful. And so, as I said, if you would like to use this different structure, telling a story or a problem solution, feel free to do that. But if you start to go to if you go to conferences yourself and you start to pay attention to the keynotes that are very good, especially if they're meant to persuade or inform the audience, the successful ones are going to have some sort of this main point, supporting evidence, and a call to action. It's not always the case. You're going to find conference speeches that are entirely a story and will make its point through that. But I would say that this essay structure works well. Now, ceremonial remarks, those can be different. If you're writing a wedding speech, for example, you want to, it is a little bit different. You want to congratulate, let's say it's a best man speech, congratulate the bride and groom. Talk a little bit about how your relationship with each one of them and them as a couple, and then you want to give your well wishes. So the answer to your question is, take a look at what type of remarks you've been asked to give, and then think about the best way to get that across. If it's some sort of argument you're trying to make, then you can use the essay structure. If it's a ceremonial remarks, think about what you're actually supposed to do. If it's a thank you speech, thank them and say why. Simplify. And if you ask the right questions, I think it will be clear. And you think about your audience and the biggest thing that you want to say to that audience, regardless of the type of speech, then you'll find yourself moving in the right direction. It'll be clear. And hey, if you have any questions, call me. I mean, honestly, I am an innovation woman myself, and I'm a member of this community. And so the folks of you who are out there who are affiliated in some way, whether a member or not with Innovation Women, there's a special place in my heart for all of you. So you have my contact information. You can email me and call me. And if you say I was on that webinar and I have a wedding toast to give, you know, what do you think the structure would be? I'm happy to help you.
You do realize, Sheri, there have been hundreds of people on this webinar, and actually, yay you, lots of great downloads from your attachments. Probably one of the most popular attachment downloads I think we've had so far. Another question here from our audience. This person says, I noticed the sample speech was thanking people in the speech. What are your thoughts about thanking the person or organization who invited you to speak?
Okay, that's a great question. Here's what ideally happens. If you're delivering remarks, you're being introduced by someone. And that person says who you are, who's invited you, just like Bobby did. And that allows you, when you come to the podium, figuratively speaking, you come to the podium, you can then launch right into your remarks. The reason that works better is because if you start your speech by saying, good morning, it's human nature for people just to automatically tune out, like you've lost them before you've even begun. Jump right in and grab their attention. If there are folks, so Bobby, say it again, did they want to know about when to thank folks? When is it appropriate to thank folks, or is it a question about the actual speech?
I think it was about thanking. What are your thoughts about thanking? So it may be that we're asking about when and if and how.
Okay. All right. So yes. Let's see. if there are folks that you need to thank, definitely do it. Don't do it at the very beginning. In the fundraising speech, there's a reason that it is subtopic 3, because she said the most, not the most important, but she's captured their attention. She's said what they did, what the organization does, and then she thanks the folks. So yes, if this is a situation when you're required to thank people for whatever reason, then definitely do it. Just be strategic about where you place it.
Got it. So our next question is, do you ever coach scientific speech writing? It seems like these principles are nice but not necessarily applicable enough to marry with the need to provide rigorous research results. Any ideas on how to convey useful statistics and studies? And I will actually provide one piece of additional information before I let you go forward answering it, Sheri. I was just reading Science Magazine last night, and there was an article in it about a new book called Championing Science, that was all about communicating scientific information. So Roger Ains and Amy Ains are the authors. So
here are my thoughts. Here are my thoughts, and it's actually a great question because it happens a lot. There's a reason that the first thing I talked about was knowing your audience. So in every situation, you've got to know who's sitting there, who's listening to you, and that's exponentially true if you are talking about a specialized industry or some specific, just exactly like you said, if your speech is highly technical or you're delivering scientific information that you've got to do, that it's okay to do that. But remember that if you want to get super technical, scientifically technical, or in terms of technology, make sure that everybody in your audience speaks that language. If it's a lay audience, then if you speak technical jargon, then they're not going to be with you. I'll give you an example. I often work with CEOs of high-tech companies, and they are delivering their annual talk to let's say their board of directors. Now, the truth is that board may not know the language of that technology. And so I encourage them to still use the principles that we've talked about. Use plain language, make it conversational, and that is if there's people in the audience who don't understand. And one specific thing I will say that I feel strongly about, because I realize my answer is pretty much it depends, and don't be too technical unless your audience is going to understand it. And then if so, go ahead, be free, to do all sorts of statistics and stuff. But one thing that I really care about is if you are going to use an acronym, even at an industry conference in front of an industry audience, make sure the first time you say that acronym, you define it. So IP telephony, right? That means Internet Protocol Telephony. And even if I'm in front of an audience of technology whizzes who are in the networking industry, I would define it first and then use the acronym. I hope that helps.
Yeah. Do you recommend including questions from previous speeches? The last group I spoke with was confused about X.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's not devastating to do it, But I think that unless there's a great reason you want to talk about why a previous audience didn't get something, then you're probably better just meeting each new audience where they are. Now, of course, if there's something that comes up again and again and again, then address it. For instance, I did it myself. I said, some people wonder when they read the speech if the same main point has to be said over and over and over again, and I addressed that because it's a common question. So it's okay, but remember, you're not presenting to the other audience, so what they do and what they care about and how they were doesn't matter really. It's the people in front of you that you have to react to.
Gotcha. Sheri, one of our questions wants to know whether you're on Twitter.
Oh, I am. I am on Twitter. You can find me at Sheri Saginore and also at Smart Speeches. That's one word, SmartSpeeches. Excellent.
So any tips? Oh, go ahead.
I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can look me up there, Sheri Saginore.
So any tips for the person who can't get past writing in depth while trying to create a rough draft? We've got someone who says it's an ADHD hyper-focus thing for them.
Yes. Write it all out and then read it to somebody. And then ask them, do you understand? What parts don't you understand? And then that may give you some guidance about what has to go. I don't think there's anything wrong with just writing a multiple-page draft and vomiting out every single thing that you can think of. It's easier to take away something than to make up something that just isn't coming. So in a way, it's a nice problem to have, but I wouldn't beat yourself up if at first there's just way too much. Get it all out on paper. Find somebody to help you determine what makes sense and what doesn't, and then start trimming.
I also find that if I'm having trouble when I'm drafting something, sometimes I just talk it out, and then it makes it easier to write the draft.
Yes, that's a terrific idea. You can also record that conversation that you have with yourself or those thoughts and then play it back, and that can help. That's a great way to sort of filter out the extraneous stuff and get to the heart of what you're trying to say.
Yeah. We've only got a couple more minutes and we've got a couple more questions. So for a high-tech webinar, is it good to poll the audience for their level of knowledge of the topic up front to know your audience?
Well, I mean, if you can then react on the fly, and if there's no way else to find out who that audience is going to be, then yeah, it helps. Unfortunately, chances are you'll already have your content done, and if your content's done, then you're going to have trouble. If it's a lay audience and you were expecting a highly technical audience.
Gotcha.
I will say this. I have a document that I use. It's called Speech Prep Questions for Event Organizers, and that's a document that I use when I get assigned to write a speech. And it asks, it's got all sorts of questions about the audience, and it's a way for me to understand who's going to be there, what level of expertise do they have? Where is it going to be? It's everything from setting to what the expectations of the topic are. And if you email me, I can send it to you. I can send it to you. All
right. One last question. Do we can also add any documents into the attachments on this for the replay? Yep, and we can also put the slides in. So we'll put the slides in and to the email and stuff that we send out afterwards for everyone. Quick question as we end this portion. One of the questions is, do you also work with men?
Oh, of course I do. Of course I do. All the time.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So Thank you so much, Sheri, for sharing all these great, helpful hints. And we're going to be continuing the Innovation Women Speak webinar series. Our next event will be how to create the right book for your brand and to elevate your visibility. And this is going to be featuring Girl Friday Productions. Megan Harvey and Christina Henry de Tesson are going to be with us on February 20th, 2019. Again, a lunch and learn if you're East Coast. It'll be noon to 1. And we're going to be having a conversation with them. We're going to be talking to Megan, who is the Executive Director of Independent Publishing, and Christina is the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships. So today it's easier than ever with advancing technology and distribution and direct-to-reader marketing. There's never been a better time to publish your own book. But let's be honest, it's one thing to want a book and quite another to know where to start. So that is going to be our next presentation. I hope you'll join us here on the Innovation Women Speak webinar series. Thank you very much. And thank you, Sheri, once again.
Thank you.